We tend to think decisions start in the mind. What do I think about this? How should I respond? What's the right move here? Sometimes we add emotion or intuition into the mix too. What we rarely consider is that before any of this happens, the body has already responded, not as a conclusion, not as an issue, just as information. Most of us have a familiar internal sequence. We think about a situation, we notice how we feel. Sometimes we pause long enough to check in with our intuition, that quiet sense that something fits or doesn't. And if the body enters the conversation at all, it usually does so much later, not as information, but as a problem, a knot in the back, a tension in the neck, a headache that just won't quite ease. We often treat that moment when the body finally draws our attention as the beginning of its messaging to us without realizing it's a continuation of something that started much earlier. Because long before the pain, the body had already registered what was happening: a subtle shift in muscle tone, a change in breath, a quiet contraction or softening that didn't have a story attached to it yet. It isn't reaction, it's recognition of your surroundings or your situation. The body doesn't arrive late to this process, it was there first. The body orients to conditions as they change, noticing what's being asked of the system long before meaning or language or emotion arrives. And because most of us were taught to push past these signals, we tend to notice them only once the information has intensified enough to demand our attention. When people talk about the body's intelligence, it's often framed as instinct, as though the body is offering conclusions we should follow or warnings we need to obey. But that framing misses the kind of knowing that's actually happening. The body doesn't know in sentences, it doesn't arrive at meaning. It knows and communicates through sensation. Neuroscience shows us that this sensing is constant. The nervous system is always tracking pace, load, duration, and recovery. It registers whether effort is increasing or easing, whether activation needs to be sustained, and whether the system has room to settle. This happens automatically, well before conscious thought comes online. So when the body responds, it isn't evaluating a situation or deciding whether something is good or bad, or if something is dangerous or not. It's recognizing conditions that can be used as data by your intuition, your emotional knowing, and your intellect. What's required to stay here? What's being carried? What is sustainable? And what's quietly accumulating? That information arrives as sensation before it becomes an emotion or a thought, not because it's vague, but because something hasn't yet been translated. One caveat here that I want to put out there. If you feel something is like physically dangerous to you, just heed that. Don't worry about whether your emotions or your logic or whatever is online. Just get yourself out of the situation. But for the things that we call dangerous, that are really more about scarcity or uncertainty, it's good to do some interpreting because the body knows something and it wants to share it with you as lived internal data. When the signals your body is sharing are repeatedly bypassed or overridden, they don't disappear, they change. What began as subtle sensation becomes much more insistent. Your body isn't interrupting, it's objecting. But when we feel its insistence in the form of pain, we interpret it as our body working against us. But in this case, objection isn't rebellion. It isn't refusal. It isn't the body working against you. It's an escalation of information. The body is saying what it's registering hasn't been received and is trying to get your attention. That distinction matters because objecting is not a decision, it's boundary data. And given how most of us manage boundaries, it may be why we ignore these signals. The body isn't trying to stop you, it's signaling that you're holding or how you're showing up is no longer working for you. What begins as sensation becomes tension. Tension becomes fatigue. soreness, or ache. And when left unattended, it becomes pain. When you don't lessen your load or expend the buildup of stress, these signals and sensations have nowhere to go. They don't vanish, they accumulate. The body registers strain early, and if it was continually overridden for a long enough period, that strain starts to organize into tension and fatigue. And when that lingers too long, it can become chronic pain, not because the body is failing, but because it's been unheard. Pain in situations of prolonged stress often is the body's way of indicating that the data it's been sending has been pressurizing with no safety valve in sight. This is a physiological response to being repeatedly ignored. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What could you do to allow your body to register the information first, to notice where the process actually begins? We're examining our internal compasses in our series on reclaiming self-trust, which include the body, emotions, intuition, and mind. We're starting with the body not because it decides, but because it underpins everything that follows.